Hello YouTube, I'm Michael Size and I switched from gas cooking to induction cooking approximately 1 year ago. Obviously I switched because I expected induction to be better. Everyone had told me that it would be better and I can confirm that it is in fact better. But what I did not expect was the extent to which it actually improved my life in general, including outside of cooking. Induction is undoubtedly awesome, but the reason why it's awesome is actually a combination of about 6 smaller benefits, which all add up to produce the most pleasant and effective cooking experience that humanity has ever invented. The first benefit is immediate response. With induction, just like with gas, there isn't any sort of delay when you're turning the heat on or off. Gas and induction are the only two technologies that offer this feature, and the fact that traditional electric doesn't offer it is probably what has been holding electrification back for the past century or so. This is something that you're gonna notice repeatedly throughout this video, because despite induction and traditional electric both running on electricity, they are actually completely different experiences. Many of the features of induction are available only on induction, and a great example are the heat safety benefits. Safety in terms of not burning your skin, and safety in terms of not burning your house down. An induction burner, of course, does not get hot. It induces heat directly into the pot, so the appliance itself only gains whatever heat the pot happens to transfer downwards into it. The burner on a gas stove gets all the way up to 200 degrees Celsius according to my measurements, and the high temperature combined with the high heat conductivity of the metal means that touching it is going to burn your skin pretty much instantly. In comparison, the glass sheet on top of an induction burner doesn't really get hotter than about 100 degrees Celsius according to my measurements, even when the cooking vessel is significantly hotter than that. And while 100 degrees Celsius is certainly hot enough to burn the skin, the surface of the appliance is made of glass, which is much slower to transfer the heat, so in practice what happens is that if you ever do happen to touch it, you have a lot more time to feel it and retract your hand without actually getting serious burns. And if you tell me that you've never accidentally burnt yourself on a gas burner, I believe you. I haven't either. But children can reach up to the stove, cats may attempt to jump up to the stove, and dogs, well, I don't know what dogs do, but you get the point. Safety considerations are usually not there to protect able-bodied, able-minded, trained attentive adults. They're usually there to protect the vulnerable, and that's why they matter so much. In terms of fire safety, well, starting a fire requires temperatures of about 350 degrees Celsius. So that's obviously trivial to achieve on a gas burner or a traditional electric stove, and it's probably possible even on a hot plate or a ceramic cooktop, because in that case the glass is much hotter than with induction. But with induction, starting a fire is nearly impossible. If you really wanted to do it, you could probably attempt to take an empty pot and heat that to 350 degrees Celsius and then use that pot to start a fire, but induction cooktops usually come with some safety features that will attempt to detect if the pot is actually getting above 300 Celsius and stop the heating before that happens. A common way in which fires actually start on a gas stove is that you forget a pot on the fire. But with an induction stove, if the appliance is left unattended for a long time, it will actually shut itself off. And you can even set your own timer. So say you forget your baked beans on the stove and go to sleep, automatic shut-off is going to mean no fires, no carbonized beans, and no ruined cooking vessel. And as far as I can tell, even the cheapest induction appliances out there include all of the safety features I've mentioned so far. The next 3 benefits all stem from efficiency, and the first one is interesting because it's actually power. Normally power is something that you trade off in order to gain efficiency, but in the case of induction stoves, efficiency is what actually enables the power. My biggest gas burner consumes gas at a power of about 3 kilowatts according to the gas meter, but because its efficiency tops out at about 50%, this means that the actual amount of heat delivered to the cooking vessel is never above 1.5 kilowatts. In contrast, my induction hobs consume at most 2 kilowatts of electrical power, but with an efficiency higher than 90%, they deliver at least 1.8 kilowatts into the cooking vessel. And in practice, this difference is actually way bigger than it even sounds in theory, because the 3 kilowatt gas burner can only achieve the 50% efficiency if you're using a very large pot. Obviously, if you put a tiny pot on it, the efficiency is going to be more like 30%, but with an induction hob, the size of the pot makes no difference. Everybody who tries induction is always amazed by how quickly the water boils, and this is actually the explanation for it. You're getting more power than your biggest gas burner, and you're able to concentrate all of it in even your smallest cooking vessel. On the topic of power, induction also features a huge range of powers. On a single burner, my hob can modulate from 200 watts, which is the same as my smallest gas burner on minimum, all the way up to 2000 watts, which as we've seen is more than my biggest gas burner on maximum. And I purchased the absolute cheapest induction appliance in the whole supermarket. But if you go for something that's actually high quality, the range of powers can be extended all the way from 100 watts up to 3000 watts. And I've seen this kind of devices in commercial kitchens. The second benefit that stems from efficiency is no surplus heat in the kitchen. In the words of an actual restaurant owner I know, if you can't take the heat, do not stay out of the kitchen, just upgrade the kitchen to induction cooktops. On a gas stove, and to some extent also on a traditional electric stove, all the energy that doesn't go into the pot is going around the pot, and not only is that wasteful in terms of the energy bill, but it also makes the kitchen uncomfortably hot. For a human being to be anywhere near excessive waste heat is always uncomfortable, and it does not matter how beefy your air conditioner is, because that's just gonna make you uncomfortably cold on one side after you were already uncomfortably hot on the other side. The only way to actually remove the discomfort is to remove the excessive heat production, and as far as I can tell, induction is the only way to do that. A lot of people will claim that induction doesn't actually remove the inefficiency, it just shifts the inefficiency out to the power plant. Now, that's a discussion that we can have some other time, but even if that was accurate, the fact remains that moving the inefficiency to somewhere outside the living space is in itself a perfectly valid benefit. And still on the topic of efficiency, the third benefit of this kind is something that I know you're going to scoff at, but cooler pot handles. Look, if you get used to induction and then go back to cooking on gas for a while, I guarantee you're going to burn your hands a few times until you get into the habits again. A lot of pot handles are made of special alloys which have low thermal conductivity, which means that they do not get hot simply from the fact that the pot is hot. But on a gas stove, when you're blasting them directly with the 1.5 kilowatts of waste heat that's going around the pot, there's no escaping that. The handles are going to get hot, and they're going to stay hot for a surprisingly long time. The final benefit I'll get to in a moment, but before that, take everything that I've explained so far and try to imagine what it would be like to cook a chicken soup on a gas stove. You need to get the water boiling first, so you put it on the biggest gas burner in hope to minimize the waiting time, but it still takes an eternity. One eternity later, when the water is finally boiling, you add the chicken, you add the vegetables, and you turn it down to a low simmer. But the pot is still on your biggest burner, so that's not actually able to throttle down to a low simmer. It's boiling excessively, so now you're gonna have to move it to a smaller burner. So you grab the pot by the handles and instantly burn yourself. This makes you extremely angry because you were already getting cranky from the excessive heat in the kitchen, so you take the time to calm down, you actually move the pot on the smallest burner, and now you realize that there's no way to set a timer on a gas stove, so by the time that it's done cooking, you're gonna have to make sure to be home and be awake to manually turn the fire off. And this is what I was talking about in the beginning of the video. Individually, all of the benefits I mentioned are small, but as soon as you actually start cooking, you're gonna notice that they all add up to form the most pleasant and effective cooking experience that humanity has ever invented. But the biggest benefit in my opinion is the one I actually haven't mentioned yet, and that is superior indoor air quality. To be clear, this is not about the climate discussion. This point is about what I call classical air pollution, which means poisons, toxins, and carcinogens in the air. I'm going to mention a wide range of air pollutants, but I don't actually have the time to explain all of them. Thankfully though, my previous video happened to be a deep dive into air pollution, so if you're not familiar with the topic or you just want to know more about the topic, that video is the perfect resource. For gas stoves in particular, here's a recap of the relevant pollutants. As long as you're burning anything, even if you're burning pure hydrogen, the flame is going to produce thermal NOx. As long as you're burning any hydrocarbon, including methane, the flame is going to produce carbon monoxide. If you're burning any hydrocarbon other than methane, the flame is also going to produce soot, so PM2.5 pollution, and if your fuel has something like a sulfur compound in it, such as mercaptan, the flame is going to produce sulfur dioxide. Additionally, you always face the possibility of releasing unburnt fuel, so I'm not talking incomplete combustion but outright lack of combustion, and the problem there is that many fuels happen to be poisons, toxins, or carcinogens. A gas stove is going to give you this full cocktail of pollutants, and while the amounts of air pollution are small, simply because the amount of fuel being burnt is also small, the reason why this particular pollution is such a massive problem is because the pollution is released inside of an enclosed space, which means that even small amounts of these chemicals can turn into hazardous concentrations of pollution. Nitrogen oxides are probably a good example in this sense. Anything below 25 parts per billion is usually considered good air quality, though some research suggests that the appropriate threshold is closer to 5 parts per billion. Concentrations in cities usually hover between 10 and 30 parts per billion, with occasional spikes that can reach as high as 50 parts per billion. But in a kitchen with a running gas stove, however, NOx concentrations can hover above 200 parts per billion, values that would be rightfully considered outrageous if we were talking about outdoor air. I mentioned PM2.5, which is actually very bad and you should go learn about it from the air pollution deep dive video. But I also mentioned unburnt small random hydrocarbons, to which you might protest that your stove is correctly installed, so it isn't going to leak any unburnt gas anyway. And that is probably true, but guess what? Every time you turn your stove on and off, you are always going to have some unburnt gas being released during that startup or shutdown sequence. You might think I'm nitpicking at this point, but I actually have a very good reason to nitpick, and in fact I even have some nittier picks. For instance, when natural gas comes out of the ground, it contains all sorts of contaminants, including vapors of mercury. The mercury is supposedly removed by the gas company before delivering the gas to my stove, but is that process 100% efficient? Almost certainly not, so how much mercury is there actually in my gas? The reason why this is a good question is because we do have an alternative. Imagine if we were actually choosing between gas and gasoline, and we were asking which of these fuels has the lowest undetectably low level of mercury in it. Obviously that's a dumb question to ask. Literally nobody knows, we cannot know, so the nitpick wouldn't matter. But what we're actually choosing is between gas and electricity, and I know for sure how much mercury my electricity delivers, and that's precisely 0. Any chemical that gets pumped into my house is pretty much guaranteed to have some impurities, but with electricity we forego all types of pumping entirely. Now, if you look at studies about the effects of this pollution, you can find studies going back decades that look at the effects on the respiratory health of children, and you can find more recent studies that look at the effects on known asthmatic individuals. But what I wasn't able to find was studies looking at the effects on regular adults. This means that before I switched to induction, I didn't actually know what to expect in this sense. So because I wasn't able to find good studies covering it, I'm going to use my personal anecdote here. 1 year after switching to induction, I've basically stopped coughing. I used to cook on gas every single day, and I used to randomly cough all the time. I used to get coughing fits if I stood next to an idling car for a while, or even if I just walked along a heavy traffic road, and even if I sat at a bar next to smokers. And when cooking, I used to start coughing pretty much immediately as soon as the flame came on. And even people around me used to notice it, and they would ask me why I'm randomly coughing all the time. 1 year later, and none of that is really happening anymore. Nobody's asking me why I'm randomly coughing all the time, because I'm not randomly coughing all the time, and I can even go back to cooking on a gas stove occasionally, and I do not immediately start coughing anymore. As far as I've been able to find, the process that I've just described here is not documented in the gas stove literature, but it is extremely similar in both symptoms and time frame to how doctors describe the recovery process for people that quit cigarettes. So my speculation is that exposing myself to hazardous amounts of air pollution every day used to keep my lungs in a constant state of recovery, and now they've gotten a chance to actually recover. I'm fairly sure that not everyone is going to experience the same improvement. I mean, we've all heard of that one grandfather who smoked 10 packs a day and died at age 97 in a skydiving accident. So people's lungs definitely differ in the amount of air pollution that they can endure. But what I can say for sure is that exposing yourself to hazardous amounts of air pollution every evening is definitely a bad idea. And in the beginning of the video, when I said that induction cooking improved my life in general, including outside of cooking, this is what I was talking about. Improved indoor air quality leading to improved health and improved life quality. If you do have a gas stove, the pollution problem can technically be solved with a venting hood. But I expect that many of you will find yourselves in the same situation that I found myself in. Your existing range hood is not powerful enough to exhaust the air quickly enough, your house doesn't have an appropriate way to provide makeup air, and even if these problems didn't exist, your range hood has an integrated fan as opposed to a remote fan, making the kitchen uncomfortably loud when in use, to the point where you're tempted to forego the use of the range hood entirely just to avoid the noise. Or even worse, your hood is actually a recirculating hood as opposed to a venting hood, so it doesn't even remove the air it sucks in, it just passes it through a filter and dumps it right back inside the kitchen. This is appropriate for filtering grease aerosols, but it does absolutely nothing for gaseous pollutants. With sufficient time and financing, your range hood could be upgraded to something that actually works. But for only $70, you can do what I did and buy 2 cheap induction hobs, put them on a piece of plywood on top of your existing stove, and plug them into a regular outlet. And I want to emphasize the regular outlet part, because I really believe that you can get away with a lot of induction without actually needing to upgrade your electrical system. Think of it this way, a lot of kitchens have a fridge, a toaster, a kettle, a microwave, an air fryer, a garbage disposer, a rice cooker, a toaster oven, and God knows what else, and when you sum up the powers on all of these appliances, you find that you've greatly exceeded the rating of your electrical system. But that's fine, because all of these appliances never run all together at the same time, and if they ever do run at the same time, is usually in short bursts, and if it's ever not in short bursts, well, they're eventually going to trip the circuit breaker, so ultimately you're still safe. The same logic applies to an induction setup once you realize that every burner is in practice used as a separate appliance. Anybody who cooks can tell you that having any burner on full blast is rare, having multiple burners on full blast simultaneously is extremely rare, and leaving burners on full blast for extended periods of time is nearly unheard of. So what I'm saying is that even if your induction setup could technically pull 4 or 6 or 8 kilowatts if everything was maxed out all at once, in real world use cases powers rarely stay above 2 or 3 kilowatts. When people can afford proper indoor air quality, they will invest in tight construction, continuous fresh air, continuous dust and particulate filtration, carbon filters, dehumidification in summer, humidification in winter. They will spend tens of thousands of dollars to protect their respiratory health, and the crazy part in my opinion is that the improvement in air quality that rich people get when going from regular indoor air to the healthiest air that money can possibly buy is very likely smaller than the improvement that you can get by moving from gas cooking to regular indoor air. To forgo this opportunity seems absolutely insane to me. And I want to point out that my setup actually keeps the gas stove in place and fully functional. So for all the people who are allegedly concerned that the government will shut off their electricity, but for some reason not their gas, well, there you go. I've literally out-prepped all of you for $70. There are more things that could be discussed with respect to stuff like the energy aspects of induction cooking, but I'll leave that for a possible future video. Until that time, thank you for watching, and if you want to see more videos about energy and air pollution, you probably want to hit the subscribe button, and you can find it somewhere in the vicinity of the like button.